They called everyone into the East Conference room that morning. No agenda, no explanation, just an internal calendar alert from the CEO's assistant with the subject line "Investor Livestream Mandatory." We crowded around the screen, our reflections flickering in the chrome trim as the broadcast began. A smooth-voiced host from corporate communications introduced the highlight of the event. Today we unveil Chryson Dynamics' biggest leap forward in autonomous network stability. My heart picked up a quiet anticipation pulsing behind my ribs. This was it. 3 years of testing sleepless nights, whiteboard diagrams, layered over whiteboard diagrams, stabilization through predictive error modulation in distributed robotics. Mine. Then the camera shifted to Taryn. I watched as he stepped confidently onto the platform. In his hand was the prototype module I'd built. Behind him, a slide appeared, the screen glowing with a title that hit me like a slap: the Roth Stabilization Engine. No mention of me, no co-inventor credit, not even an asterisk. My throat constricted as he spoke about team breakthroughs and cross-functional synergies, tossing around words he barely understood. He mimicked my phrasing, repackaged my math into sound bites. He smiled like it was his. When the feed cut out and the room burst into polite applause, I stood still. I think someone congratulated me, not realizing what had just happened. Or maybe they did, and that was the point. Taryn caught me in the hallway as I headed back to my office. "You're brilliant, Kalis," he said, as if that should be enough. "But the board felt you weren't camera-friendly." I looked at him, absorbing the absurdity. My pulse had gone completely still. I felt like a bone cooling in a freezer. "That's the reason I asked." His shrug was a full stop. "Optics matter. Let's not make this a thing." I didn't respond. I walked past him, back to my desk, closed the door, sat. Then slowly, deliberately, I opened my terminal. I pulled up the internal Git repository, and then the external mirror I'd quietly archived months ago. Every commit, every log, every change, my name embedded in every line. I scrolled through the evidence, not of his theft, but of my authorship. This wasn't revenge, not yet. This was just the beginning. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the slide, the Roth Stabilization Engine, blazing behind my eyelids like an insult carved into neon. By morning, I'd resolved to confirm what I already suspected. The pitch might have excluded me from the spotlight, but the patent filings, those were legal documents. Official, immutable. Or at least they were supposed to be. I logged into the internal intellectual property portal under my engineer credentials. It wasn't where the high-level filings lived, but it was enough to track metadata. Submission dates, modification logs, contributor lists. I typed in the patent tracking ID I knew by heart. The stabilization protocol I'd nurtured like a second child. The first thing I noticed was the author field. It read, Taryn Roth, lead inventor. J. Amiri, co-contributor. M. Lang, co-contributor. That was it. I stared at the screen, willing it to correct itself, to reload, to remember me. Then I navigated to the back-end access logs. It required a permissions override, but I'd built that override years ago, hidden inside a test tool. A click a key, and the log opened. There it was. 3 weeks ago, an admin-level edit was made to the patent record, an account tied to Taryn's executive privileges. The changes weren't just recent. They had been backdated, marked as if they were finalized months earlier. I wasn't just removed. According to this record, I'd never been there. No audit trail. No email notifications. No internal notes. A ghost protocol. My name had been unmade. 3 years. I stayed through pneumonia-bleeding data sets into shape from hospital Wi-Fi. I missed Lior's first school play, watching a video of him in his makeshift cardboard costume from a sterile hotel room after debugging all night. I had given this company every waking cell of my brain, and they erased me. For team unity. I closed the log, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. For a long time, I didn't move. Rage wasn't hot. It was cold, settled, focused. They had wiped my fingerprints from their machine. Fine. I still had the blueprints. I didn't retaliate. I archived. The day after discovering my name had been erased, I started gathering every breadcrumb of authorship they hadn't managed to wipe. Not out of vengeance, but precision. I knew what they'd taken. Now I needed proof that I'd ever been there at all. First came the code. Every commit I'd ever pushed was already duplicated across local drives, time-stamped, verified. For 3 years, I had kept redundant backups out of habit, small, quiet insurance in a system that always seemed a bit too fragile. Or maybe I just never fully trusted the hands managing it. Then I went deeper. I pulled every white paper draft where my name was marked in metadata, technical diagrams bearing my initials, internal memos with track changes where my comments solved bugs before meetings even happened, design presentations I'd written, then watched other people deliver. I screenshotted them all. Then I exported full PDF timelines, organized them by module, by feature, by deployment cycle. If someone were to reconstruct the history of Creason's quantum systems from scratch, my fingerprints would be impossible to ignore. And when I'd built my archive, I gave it breath. I uploaded my full stabilization protocol to Vindexum, the academic repository I'd quietly registered under my full name back at MIT. It was public-facing, legally neutral, and structured for citation. I titled it clearly, Varel Method for Stabilized Quantum Robotics, Drayan C. 2024. No company watermark, no co-authors, no edits, just me. Then I closed the tab and said nothing. No email, no Slack message. I didn't even mention it to the friend who still forwarded me gossip from inside our executive meetings. I went back to work as if nothing had shifted. I joined calls, submitted reports, left my camera off. I stayed still. A week later, one of the junior engineers forwarded a Stanford digest to our team thread. Hey, anyone see this? Looks kind of like our system. I clicked the link. My name was at the top, cited, credited, live. And just like that, I wasn't a whisper inside their machine anymore. I was a signal carried out, heard, and spreading. After the Stanford citation, something in me settled. Not peace, not pride, something deeper. Ownership. A quiet reclaiming of what had been stolen. That night, after Lior was asleep and the house had gone still, I unlocked a vault buried beneath layers of encryption on an external drive. I hadn't touched it in months. Kryzen Intel AES 256. Inside was a curated mess of everything they thought no one noticed. I'd started it in year 1, not for vengeance, just insurance. Engineers learned early that people forget what you did unless you have receipts. I scrolled through the folders, server anomalies, patent logs, compliance flags, ghost accounts. There were screenshots of authorization changes on internal systems that violated policy like VP-level credentials, suddenly gaining edit access to development environments at 3 a.m. There were emails flagged and saved where finance managers adjusted line items for executive travel coding, first-class flights, and private dinners under vendor engagement. There was a PDF labeled Roth-Dorsch Override, .docx documenting the exact timestamp Taryn accessed the patent editing tool alongside the system logs that proved his account had no justification to be there. Most damning of all, a flowchart I'd built after tracing a pattern of name removals from multiple patent drafts over 2 years. The edits always happened right before submission, always by the same 2 admin IDs, always favoring the same group of senior staff. They weren't just erasing me. They'd been doing it to others. Interns, contractors, even junior engineers who'd since been let go. It wasn't carelessness, it was policy disguised as process. I updated the timeline, added the Stanford citation link as a new entry. Then I synced everything to 3 secure backups and stored one in a fireproof safe under the floorboards. Truth is not revenge, but it's a start. The next morning at the office, Taryn passed me in the hallway and smiled oblivious. A glassy professional grin with nothing behind it. He didn't know what I carried in my pocket or what was already unfolding outside our firewalled world. The first message came through LinkedIn. A managing partner at a Boston-based VC firm. Dr. Drayan, we've been following the Varel method. Outstanding work. When did you transition out of Chryson? I stared at the message for a long moment before typing a neutral reply. Thank you for reading. I'm still employed at Chryson. His next response was swift. We assumed given the authorship and publication timing. No worries. Let's stay in touch. I logged out, heartbeat steady, but mind racing. They thought I'd left. And that meant word was out about my work, my name, my contribution, and not just within academic circles. I opened a terminal and began building a quiet monitoring script, something lightweight, undetectable to non-technical staff. Its only job to watch the patent server and flag any new edits or permission changes in real time. If they tried to erase someone else the way they did me, I'd know within seconds. Then I sat back and watched. A ripple had started, subtle but real. In the lounge that afternoon, I overheard two engineers whispering about a recruiter from QuantumScale offering signing bonuses. Over lunch, another mentioned stock options phrases that hadn't passed through our halls in months. By late week, a thread popped up in the general Slack, anyone else checking market rates lately, followed by a handful of emojis and suspicious silence. Taryn replied with an awkward joke and an article about loyalty in modern teams. I dropped in a comment. It's good to stay informed. No one reacted, but I knew they read it. And I knew Taryn did too, because 5 minutes later, he pinged me directly. Everything okay, Kalis, I typed. Just doing my job. And hit send. No leaks, no files passed, no whispers. But somehow, word was spreading, and I didn't have to say a thing. I turned back to my screen as a fresh alert lit up from my monitoring tool. New credentials had been added to the patent database backend. And, for the first time in weeks, I smiled. For 3 years, I'd been the glue no one saw. I rewrote back-end modules quietly at midnight. I caught floating point exceptions before they corrupted outputs. I rerouted unstable nodes during live demos without asking for credit. And I did it all while others took the stage, the raises, the praise. Not anymore. I stopped doing anything that wasn't explicitly assigned. If it wasn't ticketed in the system, I let it rot. The cracks formed within days. Bug reports began piling up, nothing catastrophic, just friction. Autonomous calibration failing at random intervals. Error logs filling with silent drift notifications. Machines freezing and holding patterns that no one could explain. I said nothing. I filed no summaries. Just watched. By the second week, customer support escalations were slipping into engineering's inboxes. Performance tickets labeled urgent with timestamps that matched protocols I'd personally warned them were unstable 6 months ago. I documented all of it. No one read it. Now, the CTO Rena stood at the head of the engineering meeting, her tone clipped breath sharp. Why are we seeing quantum drift across 5 nodes? We've got a field test in 2 days and half the units are freezing mid-execution. I leaned back in my chair, laptop open to the dashboard. Check the stabilization logs, I said. They've been triggering alerts for days. There was a pause, and no one handled them. The alerts were routed to the on-call team. I said evenly, I'm not on call this week. She blinked. But I followed protocol, I added, as defined in the escalation policy. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew the system had been running on informal labor, my labor, for years. And now that it wasn't, the foundation was showing its age. After the meeting, I walked back to my desk, ignoring the quiet glances. I opened a fresh text file and titled it, Failure Cascade Log. I had a feeling I'd need it soon. I didn't raise my voice. I raised questions. The first email had a cheerful subject line, Minor IP Logging Inconsistencies. Please review. I attached a spreadsheet with mismatched timestamps on patent edits entries that looked innocent until you noticed the backdating. No accusations, just quiet precision. Then another recommendation external patent review for due diligence. I phrased it like I was helping, protecting the company. Happy to assist with documentation, I wrote. It didn't take long for the compliance team to bite. A woman named Riva from internal audit responded clearly rattled. I could almost hear the urgency behind her overly formal tone. Would you be willing to walk us through the sources for your data? I sent her everything cleanly labeled, methodically organized, annotated with technical notes. I left out commentary. The evidence spoke better without me. Within 48 hours, an internal review was launched. And within a week, legal was in full panic. Word reached Taryn by the following Monday. He came to my office again, this time less polished. His collar was uneven. His voice was sharp. Are you trying to bring the company down? I looked at him, steady and calm. No, I said. I'm just protecting the intellectual property you care so much about. His nostrils flared. I returned to my screen. The internal audit portal had gone live that morning. I watched in real time as red flags bloomed across multiple filings. Inventor credits missing. Submission logs with duplicate IDs. Prior art citations that had been removed in late-stage edits, always under Taryn's admin credentials or someone linked to him. 1 patent, then 3, then 8. And none of them involved me anymore. That was the part he hadn't considered. By erasing me, they'd revealed the whole mechanism. My absence had turned the lights on. I opened a fresh document and labeled it Cross-Patent Irregularities, Summary Phase. Riva had asked if I'd be willing to prepare a more comprehensive analysis. I told her yes, because now they weren't just correcting my name. They were starting to see the scope of what had been broken and how much silence had covered it all this time. The invitation came from the research chair at a mid-size AI conference in Denver. The subject line read simply, "We'd be honored if you spoke." I almost didn't reply. Then I remembered the name they used mine. Not a team, not a company, just Kalis Drayan. I said yes. I flew out quietly, took no company time, and listed no affiliation. My presentation was slotted on the second day, just after lunch. The room wasn't packed, but it was focused. I stood behind the podium, steady voice eyes on my slides, and delivered a talk titled The Real Costs of Invisible Engineers. I didn't name names. I didn't expose Chryson directly. I talked about cultures of attribution patterns of silence, how technical debt and invisible labor accumulate until systems and people crack under them. But I also talked about resilience, about precision, about the responsibility we carry when we build what no one else understands. When I stepped down, no one clapped right away. They just looked at me, some stunned, some guilty. Then the applause came not loud, but steady, intentional. By the time I returned to the hotel, my inbox was overflowing. Consulting offers, panel invitations. 3 startups wanted to discuss alignment. A venture firm asked if I was exploring transitions. Back in Seattle, the ripples hit harder. A quiet leak, maybe intentional, reached federal patent authorities. The investigators reopened several Chryson filings, focusing on attribution gaps, suspicious edit histories, and internal audit flags. That same week, 2 of our strongest engineers submitted notice. By Friday, 3 more followed. One left a post-it on his monitor that just said, "Thanks for everything. You kept us alive longer than they deserved." The system staggered but stayed upright for now. No one mentioned me directly. No one needed to. At the office, I updated my files, downloaded new HR exit interview templates, and watched as the structure bled talent in slow, steady waves. The demo was for a defense contractor. 30 people in the room, another 60 on live stream. Chryson's flagship system. Our flagship system was supposed to run a seamless, autonomous navigation cycle with real-time stabilization. It failed 20 seconds in. The units froze mid-process, then twitched and stalled. One began spinning in place like a confused child. Error messages lit the control display, while Taryn stumbled through a half-scripted explanation about sensor feedback latency. Behind him, the CTO's hands were shaking. By morning, Taryn had crafted a story, unknown sabotage, possibly internal. "We're conducting a full review." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The next day, the FBI showed up. They weren't there about the demo. They were there because someone had submitted a formal complaint about deliberate misrepresentation of inventor records tied to multiple federal patent filings. They carried boxes out of legal and IT. 2 agents pulled metadata from internal repositories. The office went quiet like a school during a bomb drill. I sat at my desk calmly updating my resume. Taryn passed by twice without looking at me. The third time, he stopped. "Did you?" I looked up. "Did I?" What he lowered his voice. "Did you send the complaint?" I tilted my head slightly. "I submitted a clarification to the patent office 2 weeks ago regarding author attribution." "That's not what I'm asking." "I know." Legal called later that afternoon. Asked if I'd be available to help clarify technical ownership timelines. I'd be happy to, I said, and meant it. Then I returned to the browser tab where a startup founder had asked if I could start within the month and whether I had preferences on equity structure. I replied that I'd need 2 weeks. Then I shut my laptop and looked around the office one last time. The desks were half empty. The code was bleeding errors. And the truth finally was walking through the door. 6 months later. Creason Dynamics was a memory. The federal inquiry turned into a public spectacle. Charges weren't filed, not yet, but the settlements were steep. Their entire patent portfolio was frozen, and their defense contracts collapsed overnight. By the end of the quarter, the board had dissolved. A private equity firm bought what was left and carved it up like salvage. Taryn resurfaced briefly on LinkedIn, no photo vague title consultant. Within weeks, the account was gone. The patent office quietly reassigned credits. My name now sat at the top of the stabilization protocol, legally recognized as the primary inventor. The paper version of the Varel method had been cited 932 times and counting. I never replied to the researchers who reached out, but I saved every message. I didn't take the highest job offer. I chose the one with the cleanest architecture and the clearest terms, a small AI firm out of Palo Alto called Halden Ridge. No hierarchy, no smoke. Full creative control, a seat at the table, founder equity, my own lab. Lior visited on my second Friday. He ran past the receptionist, skidded across the polished floor, and stared at the glowing blue node array blinking gently behind glass. "You're building them again, I am." He touched the glass. "Are you famous now, Mom?" I smiled and knelt beside him. "No, I'm just visible." He nodded like that was better. Later, while he colored equations on the whiteboard wall, I sat with a mug of cold coffee, reviewing a draft paper from one of the engineers on my new team. She'd cited my method in the acknowledgments, not out of obligation, out of respect. My phone buzzed an alert from the academic database. Another citation, another mention, another footprint carved back into the world where I'd once been erased. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded, like gravity had finally remembered me. Being seen wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about vindication. It was about this: my name, my work, my rules. And this time, I wasn't disappearing.